Namaskara, good morning and welcome to today's BIC stream session towards an equal hue, women's cricket and the future of the sports movement in India. Focuses on the issues and challenges surrounding women's cricket in India, the reforms required to develop the women's game, and the relevance of these to the sports movement in the country. The speakers will discuss the history of the governance structures of the women's game, how women's cricket has grown in the UK in comparison to India, the commercial issues surrounding the sport, and the way forward in our country. This session is being conducted in collaboration with the Sports Law and Policy Center, SLPC, under the aegis of their annual flagship symposium. I'd like to invite Yogita to take the panel forward.
Thank you so much, Lekha. The Sports Law and Policy Center, in collaboration with the Bangalore International Center, is pleased to introduce our panelists for this session. We have Sharda Ugra, senior sports journalist who started her career with the Midday before working with Radio Australia, The Hindu, India Today magazine, and the ESPN. She's seen India play cricket in over 9 countries, presented conference papers on Indian sport, covered 2 Olympic Games, and won the Sports Journalist Federation of India Award for sports writing. We have Rafaelle Nicholoson, senior lecturer at the Business School of Bournemouth University. Her research sits at the boundary between contemporary history and sociology and focuses on gender and sport. Her PhD examined the history of women's cricket in Britain since 1945, providing the first comprehensive overview of the development of the sport in modern period. Her research is concerned with the changing role of women in sports governance since the 1990s. She's also a freelance journalist who writes for ESPN Cricinfo, Vice Cricket Monthly, and edits the women's cricket website, thecricketer.com. We're now pleased to also introduce the moderator for this session, Mr. Nandan Kamath, principal lawyer at LawNK, based in Bangalore, India. His practice specializes in sports, technology, and media laws, with clients ranging from international and national sports federations to leagues, teams, sponsors, and athletes. He's also the managing trustee of the GoSports Foundation. If you have any questions during this session or any other sessions of the symposium, please type them in the question and answer box below, and our panelists will try to answer them at the end of the session. I'll now hand it over to Sharda. So all over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogita. Like they say every day in these conferences, I hope I'm audible. Good morning, hello, welcome to everyone who's here on this feed, on this link. Thank you again to the Sports Law and Policy Center for an invitation to deliver this keynote alongside Raf Nicholoson, who's been a champion of women's cricket for many years and a colleague of sorts in my time at ESPN Cricinfo. So Raf, a big salam to you and many brownie points for waking up so early in the morning to speak to all of us. Great to be here on this BIC Sunday morning program and to be talking with all of you. Before I begin, I just want to set down some essential fundamentals of this keynote that I'm about to give, or this little talk that I'm about to give. I have a friend back in Australia called Mike Howard, who is cricket writer, speaker, and original Australian cricketing Indophile. And he has this wonderful habit of making everything into a cricketing metaphor. Everything that happens to you in life, Mike will turn it into a cricketing metaphor. So if you're sitting alongside him in the press box and you're getting a earful from the office, Mike will look at you and go and say, oh, the wicket's a bit damp, is it? Or if anyone was going crazy because, we're waiting for a superstar to turn up and we'll just start ranting and raving, he'll say, I think this is a little bit of slog overs batting from you now, isn't it? So he has this very habit. So that's what I'm going to do. So in a sort of hat tip to Mike, I'm going to tell you the sort of essential core in which this talk is going to be held. It's going to be about. I'm just trying to find my notes right here. They're here. Okay. So I will be coming off a long run, and naturally I will be bowling short. Let me begin by putting two sort of statements to you, and just think of the 2 thoughts out here. Think of them as the bouncer and the beamer. So here's the beamer, which is direct and it has no good intentions. What I'm saying is that if we compare Indian women's cricket, or rather the Indian women's cricket team, with our elite women athletes in most other sports, we find that the current generation of women cricketers are treated with less respect for their craft than India's other female athletes across what are our priority sports: shooting, hockey, wrestling, badminton, boxing, and so on. Now, here's the bouncer. The bouncer asks a question of the batter, and it poses a problem. So it requires a response which indicates either your professional competence or panic-stricken escape. So my bouncer with regard to the question of women's cricket is this. The BCCI standard operating procedures currently in place around women's cricket appear to indicate one of three facts. The first, that they are overjoyed, but they don't appear to know what to do about the fact that India now has a women's team that gets public attention and it's grabbed notice. The second, that they are not exactly comfortable or overjoyed with the fact that so I got the order wrong. Let me start again. Firstly, they are not exactly comfortable or overjoyed that the women's team has done what it's done. The reason that they're not comfortable or overjoyed is because they don't know what to do. And the third thing is that they are not overjoyed because they don't know what to do, and they would rather that the women aren't around. Now, all these conclusions, I think, are what you call in this day and age clickbait. Maybe all the lawyers could tell me if they are libelous and if I should be using the word allegedly in here. But I used to sort of obey Sunil Gavaskar's sort of advice from his playing days when he said that journalists should not try and read players' or officials' minds. So I'm not reading minds here. All I have are the facts at hand. So let me start by putting Indian women's cricket in the context of doing like a cross-discipline comparison of where we stand. Our most recent impressions of Indian women's cricket come from Shefali Verma's absolutely fireworks inspired test and red ball debut, which was the same day, the dramatic draw that the team pulled off in Bristol, and its so far underwhelming performance in the one-day series that's currently on. Going back a little bit to May, we had the announcement of retainer contracts for 19 women's players. Now, in monetary terms, you would think that the country's top women cricketers were being given much respect. They were awarded 3-tier contracts of rupees 50 lakh, rupees 30 lakh, and rupees 20 lakh, which in Indian terms is a very, very good living wage. These generous contract terms are targeted, we must remember, only towards the top 19 players in the country. The figures mentioned is far greater than what the bulk of India's women athletes will earn, 50 lakh, 30 lakh, 20 lakh. This will be outside a very select few, 3 or 4 in our history, whose international performances were rewarded very handsomely with from 3 sources: their prize money, their endorsements, and government rewards. So we're not getting into the prize money debate right here, but we're asking another question: whether respect for an athlete, whether it's only about money, particularly for women athletes, is it only about money? Must it not involve access, opportunity, playing time? So in this regard, where have our top flight women cricketers been treated? So let's look at the period between January the 1st, 2019 and say around December the 31st, 2020. We're looking at a period of 24 months. I'm not including ICC tournaments in this because those don't require sort of the energies of the home board, of the Indian board. And in this time, the Indian women's team, in these 24 months, they played 32 matches, 12 ODIs and 20 T20 internationals. Their last competitive fixture before COVID was, of course, the World T20 final against Australia, which pulled in 86,174 people on March the 8th, 2020. After this, their 2020 tour of England in July, August was cancelled because of reasons that seemed unconvincing at this point, or even then. From the next 12 months, they had no cricket outside of the 4 IPL T20 matches that were almost pushed in like a token gesture alongside the fact that the IPL was being held in the UAE. So the women's team went without a selection panel from January to September 2020. They had, till the last time I checked, no single point person whose job was to focus and oversee women's cricket. So this is where the women's cricketers stand. Now let's look at the best known team outside of cricket, best known sports team outside of cricket with reference to women, which is the women's hockey team. None of them are contracted. They all hold public sector jobs. When the pandemic struck in February and March 2020, they were returning from a tour of New Zealand. From January 1st, 2019, that same period, till the tour of New Zealand in 2020. They had played matches in Spain, in Malaysia, in Korea, in Japan, twice in Japan, and in England. They played these short series. Before the tour of New Zealand, in 2020, they beat USA in an Olympic qualifier held in OEC. This year, in the run-up to the Tokyo Olympics, they have toured Germany and Argentina. At the moment, they are in what they are calling a Tokyo time sort of bubble. They are waking up, sleeping, depending on Tokyo time, getting ready to adjust to that. Now, in absolute terms, the difference between men's and women's hockey is considerable, but they do have a year-round playing calendar. So moving on to another sport in which the women have done well internationally, it's boxing. From the information that is available, the same period, January 1st, 2019 to date, says that a group of our elite women boxers have participated in tournaments in Jordan, Hungary, Bulgaria, Spain, Turkey, Dubai, again in Bulgaria, and in Serbia. Some of these tournaments were alongside men, some were exclusive women's competition. Now, we must point out that the examples being cited here are not reflections of a progressive administration in a few Indian sports. We see these very focused pathways at the very least around the top tier of the women's game because they are mandated for international sports federation who want to be part of the international Olympic movement. The Olympic Charter talks the talk and walks the talk and talks it about the need to encourage, and I'm quoting from the charter here, the need to encourage and support the promotion of women in sport at all levels and in all structures with a view to implementing the principal equality of men and women, close quotes. Whether the sports administrators at the very top in sports like boxing, hockey, whatever else other the priority sports are, whether they believe in the principal equality of men and women or not, these regular match and tournament calendars for the women's participants are essential for their financial survival. An article from a Play the Game website found that of the 28 international sports federations that are present at the Olympic Games, 15 of those 28 federations depend on the Olympics for between 35 to 96% of their income. So driving women's sport today is one of the core best practices that is taking place in international sports governance. Tokyo, we are being told, is going to be the most gender-balanced Olympic Games in history. In the 100th year of the Olympics in Atlanta 1996, women formed 34% of the athletes. The figure in Tokyo is expected to be a record 48.8% female athletes to the 51.2% male athletes. In March last year, the IOC declared that for the first time in 125 years, every country at an Olympic Games would have at least one female and one male participant in Tokyo. Again, for the first time, 2 athletes are allowed to carry their national flag at the opening ceremony, 1 man and 1 woman. Now, post-COVID, we'll have a greater idea of the percentage parity numbers and whether that new opening ceremony rule is played out and countries where they actually turn up and they have this 1 man, 1 woman carrying the flag. But the fact is that in the biggest event in global sport, it has gone down a road from where there is happily no turning back. Now, let me also point you towards the urgency with which Olympic sports are responding to women's participation. The increase of women's participation at the Olympic has come about with a deliberate pruning and retooling around men's sports, particularly in the most male of those sports, combat sports. I'll just briefly touch upon the 3 in which Indian women compete: judo, boxing, and wrestling. Judo was introduced into the Olympic Games in 1992 as a medal sport. And since then, men and women have competed in 7 weight categories. So that's equal participation, opportunities, and equal medals on offer. In freestyle wrestling, in one phase, men competed across 20 weight categories and women did not compete till about 2004. So those 20 weight categories have now been cut down to 12. Women wrestlers now compete in 6 categories. Wrestling was actually threatened with Olympic extinction in 2017 and they cut 56 spots in men's freestyle wrestling in order to come close to a gender balance. Boxing has similarly dropped from 4 weight categories from among its men, who now compete in 8 as opposed to 12, and whereas women compete in 5. By the Paris Olympics of 2024, the IOC, that's the International Olympic Committee, wants athletics, cycling, and boxing to be perfectly gender balanced. What we've also seen at this point is the issue of the transgender athlete, but that's a topic for another day. Now, how does this deliberate, purposeful gender balance at the top level translate itself across the Indian sports movement. You can actually say that the stakeholders of our sport, in Olympic sport particularly, have not been given any options but to comply. As long as the Olympics have a great hold over the Indian sporting imagination, our sporting governance, particularly when it comes to questions of female access and participation, will fortunately be dictated by a more progressive worldview. The need to stay in step with international practices produces a knock-on effect. It translates into policy changes which lead to a better spread of participation, a more equitable distribution of training and playing calendars, and from there you're back onto the cycle of results and funding. For all the flaws that exist in the Olympic movement, whether it's gigantism or their eye-watering corruption, we cannot fault it for the absolute commitment to ensuring that those who hold up half the sky have an equal right to own half the space under the Olympic tent. In the midst of these transformative changes taking place across the global sporting landscape and finding themselves replicated to an extent in the Indian sports movement, we are left looking at the state of Indian women's cricket. And the word I'm going to use for it is a very harsh one. It is shabby. It does not, now that word does not do justice to the pockets of excellence that have been created over the course of, say, over 10, 15 years across the country with reference to women's cricket. But I'm using the word shabby in a big picture sense, standing back and being deeply saddened by how the world's richest and strongest cricket country treats its women's players. Not just the national team, in which they have given them these 19 women, they've given them these generous contracts, or what you can say, thrown money at them, but at one level below. It's A team, the people that are just pushing towards the boundaries of getting. Now, a few days ago, a colleague of mine, Jonathan Selvaraj from ESPN, he reminded me that women have been playing cricket, and Raf will tell you more, far longer than they have boxed or wrestled or lifted weights or played field hockey, table tennis, badminton, football, or even cycled at an Olympic Games. But in our country, this is where we see where women's cricket stands. What we see happening in India is a reflection of the sport's sort of historical past as a sport that is rooted across empire and subject. In some parts, cricket has tried to renovate, in some parts of the world, cricket has tried to renovate itself over the last 25 years or so in keeping with professional sporting practice. But the empire never really quite goes away. Its center merely shifts, and at the moment, that center is located in Indian cricket. The governance model that has been made to work across our Olympic sport from the global level through to Indian structures cannot be made to work in Indian cricket, because right here at the very heart of empire, we are seeing at work a particularly desi flexing of old-fashioned male entitlement. Let me read out a few quotes to you from the excellent Playfield magazine, which was created by sports journalists last year to support their industry during the pandemic. The quotes are unattributed because there appears to be some degree of embarrassment at having your name put to these words, but not enough embarrassment to stop you from uttering them. So, a BCCI official is quoted as saying, "There is no gender discrimination as far as the BCCI is concerned, but you just can't compare them with men's cricket and speak of the same pay structure." Then another veteran official kindly offers you this. At your workplace, you have to earn your salary by contributing to the growth of the product. We are all for promoting women's cricket, but please look at it pragmatically. You can't have a workers' union tactic to demand things. Women's cricket has to earn an entity of its own and take pride in it. This is from 2020. And do note the tone. Workers' union tactic to demand things, team, and earn an entity. These words are so far removed from the Olympic Charter's ideals. Encourage and support women at all levels and in all structures. And so that is one of the Olympic ideals that doesn't seem to be here anyway. And never mind the other one, which is implementing the principle of equality. Now, in a short conversation I had with Saurav Ganguly a few months ago about women's cricket, he said, the women have everything. And he recited the women's playing calendar all the way to the World Cup. So what we are hearing here is what I call empire speak. One second, I'm just going down the wrong. Yeah, what we are hearing here is empire speak. Or if I may take the liberty to, among those of you who sometimes dabble in Latin, to use an Indianism, it's a bristling, what you call Maibap Giri that shows up ever so often in our sport. Raf, I'll explain this word to you a little later. This is happening at a time when the Olympics are pushing for women's sport to at least be globalized in terms of the basic access, opportunity, playing time. Maybe the best route at this point is to say bygones and to look ahead, to turn away from the top tier of Indian cricket and see what's taking place at the ground level. On Friday, the opening panel discussion at the Sports Law and Policy Symposium was called Pathways to the Women's Game, which I would request all of you to listen to, those of you who haven't, to listen to it again. And the pathway offered excellent ideas and excellent examples. It had Srinivas Reddy from the Andhra Cricket Association, who talked about their district-wise talent hunt. They have a residential academy there. It had Sabah Karim and Professor Ratnakar Shetty talking about the need for state associations to drive district and zonal competitions and outreach programs in tier 1 and tier 2 cities. So, and it had Sushma Verma, who was asked as a cricketer what she would want to do for women's cricket. And her whole talk was about tournaments, it was about contracts, and it was about just an under 16 tournament, a chance to play fundamentally. So what will hold all these scattered initiatives around women's cricket together is what appears to be missing at the top at this point, which is leadership. The desire to actually do on the ground through policy and initiative, rather than to merely proffer words that offer a grand echo. To do like the Olympic movement has done, with women's participation and gender balancing, dragging several conservative countries and federations and sports along with them. So it doesn't matter that there are countries at the Olympics who disapprove of women's boxing or wrestling, but surely those women can run or fence or ride a horse. Just give them a chance to show the world that they can do it, and more will follow. Just open the damn door. Over the last 25 years, Indian cricket has muscle flexed its superiority over other Olympic disciplines due to its financial strength and its distance from government funding and those regulations attached to it. It has held itself up as an example to other Indian sport about how to maximize marketability via broadcast rights and how to earn an income. In the case of its women's game, however, it has chosen to act as if this is the 1970s. It's operating outside the homes of one or two people, and it has budget constraints. The Olympic sports it looked down upon can give Indian women's cricket a lesson on how to work with women. It's not that the governors of those sports are saints, it's that they were given no choice. Despite this modern, flat world, globalized sporting ecosystem being embraced everywhere, including at the ICC, in Indian cricket is run not with leadership, but with imperium. Let's take the example of the Equal Hue report itself, which was released at the SLPC symposium in 2020. Now, that is something that the BCCI itself could have commissioned. Okay, so they didn't commission it. Maybe they would want to know what is there in it. I know that the report reached them, and I also know that there has been zero response. In a quiet COVID year, in a fit of peak, maybe they could have commissioned their own study of the state of the women's game. Now, from this conversation I had with the cricketer Mansi Joshi yesterday, Mansi told us that she had played handball. She was a track athlete who ran sprints and she jumped, but cricket had such a hold on her that she never let it go. Now, that is a romantic story, but it should actually be the reverse. Cricket should not let its girls go. This is because, unlike with the boys, the access points and pathways for cricket are not well defined. It is far defined in other sports for Indian boys and girls who turn to sport as a means of livelihood. It is why, apart from traditional strongholds which produce athletes, you get female hockey players from Mizoram and female middle distance runners from Gujarat. And this is our international quality hockey players and runners. India's sports structures are not perfect and have huge gaps in tournament opportunities. But our women athletes from the hinterland, they know where to go. There will always be a district school PT teacher who will know where the nearest Sai center is for their most promising female student that they may run into. Cricket is everywhere in India, in our face, on our screens, replete with cash. But for every woman who plays it or may want to play it outside of the big metros, it is a mirage. This, when women have been under the BCCI's banner for the last 15 years, which includes a whole generation. For the better part of that time, the women cricketers were rendered invisible. In those 50 years, Indian women across other sports found their places in the sun. Olympic medalists, world champions, world number ones, Asian champions, Commonwealth champions, shooters, boxers, wrestlers, jumpers, throwers, fencers, gymnasts, sailors, women in badminton, tennis, table tennis, squash. hockey, football, rugby. The doors were thrown open and their numbers grew. The interest for cricket amongst Indian women lies simmering beneath the surface. And in our numbers, that instantly means we are talking of thousands of girls. The performance of the Indian women in those two finals over those 2-year period has taken the sport to a point where its spreading ecosystem and its growing fan base must leave its governors, IOC or no IOC, with no options but to keep pace with the best practices in women's sports worldwide. We must keep hammering to them, you, me, every fan, everyone involved, that India's women cricketers will no more be rendered invisible. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much for that presentation and the talk. Now we're over to Rafaelle for her presentation.
Well, I think that's going to be difficult for me to follow, Sharda, but I will try. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It's a real honour. If I sound a little bit croaky, it's because, as previously mentioned, it is quite early in the morning in the UK. It's about just gone 6 a.m. So yeah, hopefully I can still speak coherently and contribute well to what I hope is going to be a really interesting discussion. I like to start talks like this by sharing a little bit of a timeline of women's cricket history, because contrary to some media coverage, women's cricket didn't start at Lord's in the 2017 World Cup final. Women have been participating in cricket for centuries, as early as 1344. The key dates to highlight on this, as far as are relevant to my talk, are the formation of the first governing body of women's cricket in England in 1926, the English Women's Cricket Association, or the WCA, the first international women's cricket, which took place in 1934. An England team visited Australia and played in test matches. Women played in the first ever Cricket World Cup in 1973, and that was also the year that the Women's Cricket Association of India formed. India then hosted the second World Cup in 1978, and that was the first opportunity for England and India women's teams to meet each other in women's international cricket. And in 1986, the Indian women's team made their maiden tour of England. I'll just flag up as well that in 1998, the Women's Cricket Association handed over the governance of women's cricket in England to the England and Wales Cricket Board, who are now responsible for it. And that national level merger was reflected in 2005 when the ICC took over the running of the global women's game from the women who had been running it previously, the International Women's Cricket Council. And that's the point that I'll return to a little bit later. But essentially what we're dealing with when we're looking at English women's cricket, which is, I think, the kind of task that I've been given in today's keynote, is to try and kind of explain to you the situation that's prevailing in England, and perhaps we can do some useful comparisons with the Indian situation in the Q&A. But we've kind of had two distinct eras in England. We've had the amateur era, which lasted for a long time, right up until 2008, and then there's been a gradual transition to professionalism since 2008. If we think, starting off with thinking about the amateur era, so by that I mean that all of the players in that period, including those who represented England, were completely unpaid. They were having to take time off work to compete and to go to World Cups. In terms of what this meant for what women's cricket in England looked like, well, it meant that funding cricket tours, international tours, was very difficult. So they were entirely self-funded by the players, and they were organised on the basis of players paying their own travel costs, their own uniform and all their expenses while they were abroad, and obviously also being prepared to sacrifice several months' worth of wages. And there's just a couple of quotes on the slide reflecting the situation in those first two England tours to Australia in 1934, 1935 and 1948-49 about fundraising, etc. And the team that went to Australia and New Zealand in 1934-35 was not representative, because the women who went couldn't be selected on merit. It all had to be done on the basis of who could afford to travel. Now, this leaves quite a long-standing legacy that's still being felt in English women's cricket, I would say, because it has a big impact on who's playing. It's a very white, very middle-class sport traditionally, being played by women who have kind of money in their pockets and who are able to fund what is quite an expensive hobby. In many cases, and that continues right up until really relatively recently. If you look at surveys being done in the 1990s in England, so the General Household Survey I've included here, a statistic that shows that only 0.1% of adult women were playing women's cricket regularly, so it was still a very minority sport. And if you look at a Sport England survey from 1999, this again kind of points to it being a very white sport. So a figure of 0% was actually given for participation in women's cricket by all ethnic minority groups. I think that was rounded down, but it still shows that we're talking about a sport, as I say, that is kind of very white and very middle class. Perhaps there are kind of some problems there with a sort of sense of women's cricket as being both perceived and in practice quite elitist. In terms of other issues faced by women in the amateur era, the legal situation as far as women's sport goes. So there is landmark legislation passed in the UK in the 1970s. The Equal Pay Act in 1970 is supposed to guarantee equal pay for equal work, and the 1975 Sex Discrimination Act outlawed discrimination in England on the basis of sex. However, there is a specific exemption for professional sport in this 1975 Act. Therefore, it's specifically given an exemption whereby it's perfectly legal for sporting organisations to continue paying men and women very, very disparate sums. Access to all cricket pitches is controlled by men. They own all of the cricket grounds in England, and a good example of this is the fact that there are no women's matches played at Lord's until 1976. Despite decades of campaigning on behalf of the Women's Cricket Association. And I think that India women don't end up playing at Lord's until 2006. So again, that's very recent. Again, there are big issues with generally with access to kind of high quality coaching and those kind of resources. So Ruth Prideaux, a very important figure in the history of English women's cricket. She became England women's first coach in 1988 and devoted an awful lot of time and effort into that role, but she was unpaid. So again, it's still a very non-professional setup. And these issues all remain important by the onset of the 21st century. We do gradually, though, move into a more professional era. It's important to emphasise, I think, that this was a very gradual transition, though. And I think, as we all know, change is often very slow and incremental and doesn't necessarily happen overnight. The key moment comes with this merger in 1998 between the WCA and the ECB, and this is driven from above by the Sports Council, now UK Sport, who are the kind of UK government organisation who are driving funding and policy for women's sport. And their 1993 policy document recommends that where women's and men's sports run separately, a single governing body should be established. As the second quote on the slide suggests, there are many women within the WCA who are very unhappy with this merger. And they feel that they've kind of been forced into it by pressure from above, and they're concerned about being disempowered by the merger and handing over power to a lot of men who don't really understand women's cricket. But ultimately, that is what happens. Again, I'll return to that point slightly later. What changes at this moment of merger? Well, initially, actually, very little. Initially, it's probably quite a regressive move, in fact. It takes the ECB 10 years before it begins this process of professionalisation. So a change in governance kind of brought about by this legal pressure from the government doesn't necessarily create change or a move towards gender equity in and of itself. It takes time. So the key steps on the transition are in 2008, the ECB introduced chance to shine coaching contracts. They're kind of semi-professional contracts that are funded in conjunction with the Cricket Foundation charity, who kind of initiate this chance to shine scheme, which is about reintroducing cricket into English schools. And there's 10 contracts initially offered, and the women who have them get to spend 50% of their time playing cricket and 50% of their time doing coaching. In 2011, tour fees and match fees were introduced by the ECB. And then finally, in 2014, we do see the introduction of these full professional contracts. And at that point in time, they were the first fully professional contracts for any women's cricket team anywhere in the world. So this was a major step forward, quite a kind of revolutionary step. There were initially 18 central contracts. I believe there are now 17, and I've included an approximate figure for how much they were worth on the slide, between 15,000 and 50,000, because they were done on a tier basis, 3 tiers, and then there's a captain's contract that sits above that, and that's still the way that they're done. Just to give a little bit of context, the UK average salary in 2014 is given on the slide, and the UK minimum wage is in 2014 is also given on the slide, so they're kind of if you're on a bottom tier contract, you're earning slightly above minimum wage. So these contracts are definitely a big step forward, but they're not necessarily hugely generous. They have evolved over time. They now run for 2 years. Initially, they ran for 1 year. So there's a little bit more player security now, which is great. And the pay has increased. However, I have also given a sum based on what the England men's test players were earning in 2014, which was obviously a significant amount more, and that still remains the case. There's still enormous pay disparity between England men's and women's players. And one issue really that I think we have in England that I don't think that you have in India is that the ECB have never released exact figures about how much the England women's team are paid and how much these contracts are worth. And my feeling is that that is perhaps actually deliberate, in the sense of there's an attempt there to deflect the criticism that they would otherwise attract by journalists like myself being able to say exactly what the disparity is between the men and the women. So the sums that I've given are approximate. So why does this kind of transition to full professionalism and why are these contracts sort of introduced in 2014? What is it that changes? Well, obviously, the transition to being governed by the ECB is quite significant. The ECB are a fully commercial organisation with a huge annual turnover. They just don't compare with the days of the WCA, who are reliant on fundraising, very much a volunteer body. But as I've said, the ECB take 15 years to move towards having these professional contracts. So there are a number of other factors that came into play. One of which is the fact that the England women's team had enjoyed enormous success in the preceding years. So particularly in 2009, they had won both the 50 over and the 20 over World Cups in the space of 6 months. And it's unfortunate, but it is still the case that a successful women's team is much more likely to win over those kind of in charge of women's sport and then an unsuccessful team, because it's a sort of PR move then to celebrate the achievements of your women's team. There's also definitely pressure put on the ECB from other women's sports. Firstly, there's a kind of general sort of societal embrace of women's sports in England and in the UK after we hosted the 2012 London Olympics. So that's definitely a factor. Women's sport is becoming kind of more highly visible and more accepted across society. In terms of other kind of major participation sports in the UK, football or soccer is the big one. In 2011, the Football Association had launched a kind of semi-professional women's super league. So women's football was seen to be becoming much more of a career option. And what the ECB were hoping to do, I think, by introducing their contracts was to attract the best athletes away from women's football into women's cricket. There's more commercial interest developing in women's sport back in 2014. So 2014 was also the year when the England women's team signed a major standalone sponsorship deal with Kia Motors. So all of the England women's players got these shiny new Kia Sportages. And this was the day when they announced the deal at Lords, and the groundsman got quite upset because somebody decided to drive one onto the outfield at Lords, as you can see here. So that was very significant because it showed that women's cricket was a kind of successful brand, if you like. And one of the women pictured on the screen here on the right, Claire Connor, I think she is significant as well in her own right. So here she is. She has worked for the ECB since 2008, but she was gradually kind of rising up the ranks. She's now leading director of women's cricket. I think having a former player, because Claire was an England player herself, in a powerful position like that was very significant. She was able to make a successful case to the rest of the board. And there's a quote from her on the screen about essentially, we're expecting these players to be super women. And that there was a bit of a tipping point going on in terms of the expectations that were being put on them in terms of their time commitment to the game. And therefore it was felt to be necessary. But Claire herself, I think, was always kind of pushing for more. So there's a sort of convergence of a number of factors that allow this professionalisation to take place and these contracts to be introduced. I think there is one key thing, though, which specifically explains the timing in 2014. And that is well illustrated by the two contrasting images on the slide. If any of you follow men's cricket, then you may remember that in 2013-14, the England men suffered a very humiliating tour of Australia. They lost the Ashes Test Series 5-0. And that was then contrasted by the England women's team, who won back-to-back Women's Ashes series at home in 2013 and then in Australia in early 2014. So in order to escape some of the very negative PR that was surrounding the men's Ashes kind of drubbing at the hands of Australia, I think that the ECB felt, well, let's reward and recognise and put the spotlight on our women's team who have been much more successful there. So it was almost a way of taking some of the negative PR and turning it into positive PR. What's happening with domestic women's cricket in England, or what happens and has happened and is happening now? Well, in the past 18 months, we've taken great strides towards the professionalisation of domestic women's cricket in England. Traditionally, women played county cricket, which was very much something that was done on an amateur basis, organised on kind of shoestring budgets. And the ECB have kind of now branded women's county cricket officially as recreational. We then moved into having the Kia Super League, which ran for 4 seasons between 2016 and 2019. And this was a semi-professional 2020 competition that was an attempt to kind of bridge the gap between county and international women's cricket and develop higher standards for the England team. And it also attracted the world's best players. So several Indian women played in it. Harmanpreet Kaur, Smriti Mandana, Dipti Sharma and Jemima Rodrigues all enjoyed stints playing in the Kia Super League. One of the problems, though, with the KSL was that it was never funded sufficiently to make it professional. For all players, except for the overseas and for the England women, the level of pay was very low. It only ran for 1 month a year, and for the other 11 months of the year, all of the participants were effectively still amateurs. Now, the Kia Super League was abolished in 2019 as part of the ECB's new action plan, transforming women's and girls cricket, which was a kind of, or is a central cornerstone of their new Inspiring Generations strategy. The KSL is due to be replaced by the Women's 100. The 100 is taking place for the first time this summer in England. It was going to be played last year, but obviously the pandemic put paid to that. And there's been some really exciting kind of discussions around what that means for gender equality in cricket. The prize money for that is going to be split equally between the men's and the women's competitions. And again, some of the Indian women, as well as some of the other of the world's best players, are going to be coming to play in that, notably Shafali Verma. So that's going to be really exciting to see. One of the other central elements of this new ECB strategy is a £20 million investment in women's cricket over 2 years, that's some of which is going towards creating what we saw introduced late last year. So 8 new regional centres of excellence, to which 41 new domestic professional contracts are attached. So we do now have a kind of core, or a core group of new domestic professional women's cricketers in England. So where does this impetus for the new domestic professional contracts come from? Well, I think that, skipped over this. Claire Connor has said that her aspiration is for a fully professional domestic women's structure by 2024. So that's seen to be the next step. Quite an interesting aspiration, which was actually expressed pre-pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see whether it happens as quickly as that. But at least we know that that's the direction of travel, as it were. So why in 2020 do these professional contracts get introduced? I think that there's an element of humiliation that comes with England losing the 2019 Women's Ashes series quite badly. Coach Mark Robinson kind of explicitly stated that he felt that the poor quality of the England women's domestic competitions compared with Australia's very high quality professional domestic structure was one of the key factors in that defeat. Again, I think that the ECB are and were under pressure from other women's sports. So, for example, in football or soccer, the Women's Super League turned fully professional in 2018. So if you're trying to attract the best athletes, the best women to stay in cricket, then you've got this competition coming from football or soccer. I think, though, that to some extent, the fact that the domestic professionalisation takes so long in coming is testament to, in some ways, the limited power of Claire Connor. So I talked about the importance of having her on the board, but she's obviously surrounded by many men who don't have the same commitment to women's cricket that she does. You know, she actually said, she was asked in 2019 at the end of the Women's Ashes series, why has it taken so long to get to this point when you're prepared to commit more resources to domestic women's cricket? And she basically said, well, organisations have different priorities at different times. She's obviously not going to come out and say, well, you know, I'm not supported by the other people on the board, but reading between the lines, that's kind of what's going on. Just a quick summary of kind of the impact of professionalism that we've seen in England. Obviously, higher standards makes the women's game more exciting to watch, means that we get increased media coverage and increased crowds as well. So here's a photo of the sellout crowds at the World Cup final at Lord's in 2017, very memorable day. And we're also getting more TV coverage of women's cricket in England. So since 2015, all home England women's matches have been televised, and that includes the few women's test matches that are played are also all being televised for the first time. So that's quite a breakthrough moment as well. A very key factor as well has been the fact that now the England women's team are professional. They automatically become members of the Professional Cricketers Association, which is effectively our kind of trade union for cricket in this country. And that means that they get all of the support that the PCA provides. So, for example, somebody like Sarah Taylor has had well-documented problems with her mental health, and the PCA have been able to support her with that. And also with kind of transitions from moving from cricket into a post-cricketing life, they are able to support those transitions. And Heather Knight is now a vice chair of the PCA. Heather Knight is the England women's cricket captain. So they are moving towards having more representation for women within the PCA. What remains to be achieved? Well, we've made great strides in English women's cricket in recent years, but we're still a long way from genuine parity with the men's game. For me, as a journalist, it's still impossible to make a living just writing about women's cricket. So I am obviously also working as an academic, and I think that is problematic because it means that often the best journalists are forced to go off and work in the men's game, and they are lost to the women's game. There's still a lack of diversity, I think, in English women's cricket, and that's a hangover from some of the issues that I talked about earlier. So some of the issues regarding women's cricket being a middle-class sport, I think, have disappeared because it's obviously now possible to make a living out of cricket and to earn money if you're a woman playing cricket, both domestically and at international level. But there are still problems with diversity. We're still seeing only 2 black women have ever played for England. So Ebony Rainford-Brent, who obviously spoke quite movingly during Black Lives Matter last year about the racism that she'd faced within the women's cricket system. And we've recently seen Sophia Dunkley very successfully make her debut as well. So I think that there are still issues there in terms of a lack of diversity. And again, equal pay. So I've included a bit of a pie chart on the slide in relation to the 100. Obviously, the 100, as I've said, is being touted as this great moment of equality for women's cricket, for English women's cricket. And that's partly because of the equal prize funds that are being given to the men's and the women's winners. But if you look at the overall kind of sums allocated to the 100, you can see here that most of it is being swallowed up by that dark blue segment, which is the men's salaries. So there's enormous disparities still there. And as I mentioned earlier, professional sport in England is still specifically exempted from the legislation dealing with equal pay, which is now the UK Equality Act 2010. So yeah, that's still an issue. And then finally, in terms of, I just wanted to make a quick point about governance. There are big differences in the way in which women's cricket was governed by the WCA and the way in which it's currently governed by the ECB. And one of the important ones is who runs the sport. So this is from the first minutes of the WCA, first meeting, 4th of October, 1926. And it was agreed very early on in the WCA's formation that no man may hold executive office. It was a women's only organisation. It was a women's only space. It was a very important kind of arena of feminism, as I've argued in my work. Who runs women's cricket now? Well, it tends to be people who look like these men on the screen, white men who have had their formative experiences in men's cricket and don't necessarily have a kind of grounding or a knowledge base of the women's game. So here's my here's some stats about kind of who runs women's cricket now, some quite damning stats. So between 1998 and 2010, after the ECB took over women's cricket, no women sat on the ECB board. And currently, there's just one female chief executive in county cricket in England. And there's some stats about a limited number of cricket board members and cricket coaches being female in England. So my radical proposal for the future of women's cricket's devolution, I think we should give serious consideration to adopting a model of devolved governance for women's cricket. For example, in England, we could have the ECB remaining in overall control, but the women's game could largely be run by a separate women's cricket board, granted its own budgetary autonomy, with the ability to make decisions independently of those being made in the men's game. And I think if we move towards this model, this would once again mean that decisions would be made with women's cricket as the priority by those who kind of have the welfare of women's cricket as their priority. So that's my vision for the future, I suppose, and I'll wrap up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rafaelle. Now we'll be commencing a panel discussion, which will be moderated by Nandan Kamath. Over to you, Nandan.
Thank you so much, Yogita. Thank you, Sharda and Raf, for those wonderful keynotes. Clearly, lots to unpack, many locks to be unlocked. So I think those key notes are going to be extremely valuable. But I'd like to come back, Sharda, to a point you made about how the Olympic movement, in some sense, has overtaken the cricket movement with respect to certain mandates, certain sort of metrics that have been achieved with women's sport. How much of the state of women's cricket worldwide can be placed in a colonial context? The reality that it's essentially the UK and post-colonial nations that play this sport.
Completely. That has been the entire sort of focus of cricket and how its governance has panned out over all this time, whether it was men, whether it was women. One of the factors that I forgot to mention while I was talking is that that there was such a reluctance for Indian cricket to be a part of the Olympics, whereas the ICC is pushing for it to kind of get there in 2020, and you get better funding and it's more widespread. So because then those rules will start to apply. You would think that those rules will apply, and then there is a certain you're now seeing an example of non-colonial countries, particularly in the women's game, taking to 2020 cricket. You have the examples of Thailand and of Brazil, which has given its women contracts before it gave the men contracts. So you've got this kind of spread has taken place almost instinctively because of the simplicity of the 2020 format and so on. So it's the format has freed the game of these colonial shackles. And I think in all the, other than say a country like, other than Australia, New Zealand, England, where women's cricket is fairly advanced as compared to say India, Pakistan, South Asia. I mean, the Indians would take great umbrage at being included in the South Asia basket, but facts are facts. So other than those countries, you are, because then they have become the example. Then they have become the model by which other nations need to follow. And Raf's talk was very insightful with reference to the scale at which you see the difference that is there in the English game, and in our mind we're just saying, yeah, but it's there, but it's there, but women have chances. The point about domestic contracts is also an interesting one, because that is being discussed again in India. It's still very much debatable. It's not debatable. I mean, it's just become a question of contention, as in when is it going to happen? It's not even there for the men, never mind the women. So the colonial structures of the game have been dissipated by 2020 cricket, and its involvement, I think, in the Olympic movement will do a greater lot of good for many countries that may have issues about governance with regard to women's cricket, particularly women's sport, women's cricket.
Thank you, Sharda. And Raf, how do you see this as a historian, as a sociologist? Sort of the issues about social mobility in general, sort of voting rights, equality. How do those track to the movement in cricket versus other sports and the broader Olympic and sports movement?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think that actually, in terms of kind of women's cricket and its relationship to kind of colonialism, and one of the things that actually, in my mind, holds women's cricket back in its development is the conservatism of some of the women who are kind of involved in administrating it for many decades, and their kind of almost attachment to some of these very colonial ideals about kind of who should be playing and the right way to play, and their conservatism, I think, in a way, makes them reluctant to embrace the feminist movement, which is seen as a very radical and a kind of very left-wing, sort of more progressive movement. And I think that there's a sense in which in which actually women's sport or women's cricket doesn't embrace feminism until this kind of moment of the London 2012 Olympics, in which suddenly it becomes okay if you're a female cricketer or if you're Claire Connor helping to run women's cricket to actually say, I'm a feminist and I kind of support women's equality in all areas of life. But actually for many decades as a historian, and when I went and did a lot of oral history interviews with former cricketers, they were kind of very reluctant to embrace that feminist label and to see their women's cricket as at all linked with other sectors of women's equality, like work and pay and all those kind of other areas of women's rights, which are so important. So I think that women's sport has been relatively kind of recent, certainly in the UK, to embrace that, and that has held it back. And I think that Sharda's right that a lot of this is a legacy of cricket's ties to sort of imperial ideas about status and about hierarchies and about kind of not wanting to rock the boat, essentially.
Yeah, and I think there's Sharda, go ahead.
It's interesting what Raf is saying, because at one point, a couple of I think maybe a few months ago, Diana Adelji, who is basically the foremost Indian women's cricketer, and she's most visible in terms of speaking out openly about issues in cricket. She actually called the BCCI a male chauvinist organization, and those are actual quotes. Like a male, that's what she said, saying this is what it is. And I don't think that there is, again, with the women who play cricket, there is there's a little bit of let's hold back a little bit to what we really feel. But Diana didn't hold back at all at this point. And over the course of her career, she at every point she brought out the fact, particularly in these last 15 years, where the BCCI was in charge of the women's game and paid no attention to it. So in that sense, it became a very sort of forthright feminist kind of a thing to say. But you're not hearing the same things echo amongst the current women's team, or even amongst too many other administrators. They just want to sort of keep it a little bit quiet and keep it a little bit, let's get our work done as much as we can, and then we'll see. I don't know what you think about that, Nandan, just sort of looking at it neutrally.
Yeah, no, I think if you put a broader context, and Sharda, I think you've also read, for example, Prashant Kidambi's Cricket Country, about the first women's team to come to the UK. And you read a lot about the role of what is today sort of called social distancing in a COVID context, but the use of cricket to, in some sense, show yourself as distant from the common person, and in many ways to be more British, to be more colonial, and to be more accepted in some ways. And to some extent, what Raf talked about feeds into that, which is a colonial context where cricket isn't a sport that rocks the boat. It isn't the one that leads these movements. It follows, it moves like a ship, it comes slowly, it will get there, but it's going to take its own time. Is that a fair comment, Raf, when you look at post-colonial countries in terms of the role cricket has played, in some sense, the civilizing role that it was meant to play? And is there an afterglow and sort of in some sense, a legacy left behind with that role cricket played through the 20th century and in some sense still plays?
Two very big questions there. So I'll take the second one first. In terms of the legacy of colonialism, I think certainly in England, that is one of the reasons why I think that we still have, we're still very far from having the kind of England women's cricket team that reflects the diversity of our population. And it's a kind of intersectional issue, really, whereby you know, it's still quite difficult in many ways to access women's cricket if you're not from a well-off background, or if you aren't white. I do think that a lot of that does come down to, as I say, cricket, and I think women's cricket is in some ways equally as guilty of this as men's cricket, of a kind of embrace of these existing hierarchies within the empire. So I think that the legacies are there in terms of who's actually participating, and that's very visible just by looking at the England women's team. I've forgotten what the first question was. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, no, just the notion of social distancing and being sort of adopted in a British way of life, and it's in some sense the civilizing ideal. Do we still see, in some sense, remnants of that behavior in post-colonial countries, which is essentially the cricketing world, right?
Yeah, and I suppose you were kind of getting at whether cricket is less progressive than other
or rather
sports.
less revolutionary. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's why, in some ways, the moment in 2014 in which the ECB introduced these women's professional contracts is such an interesting one, and why I kind of focused on that particularly in the presentation, because that is quite a revolutionary moment, and probably in some ways in English cricketing terms, men's and women's, one of the most revolutionary things that has ever happened in cricket in this country, because it really was the ECB kind of leading the way. And I think we sometimes forget that because we look to Australia now and we look at what they're doing and they seem so far ahead, but actually at that point those were the only professional contracts for a women's cricket team anywhere in the world. But I think, as I said, that some of that is about pressure at that point in time from other women's sports. And I guess that partly relates to a lot of what Sharda was saying about there being, you know, a sense in which actually what would be useful is if kind of the BCCI did look to the example of what other women's sports are doing a bit more. Because certainly that was very significant in England, I think, in the professionalisation process, was actually this pressure from other sports and this idea that we needed to catch up. And I think there's definitely a kind of discourse in the 1990s in England that cricket is falling behind, that cricket is becoming kind of out of touch and is being very much overtaken by soccer, by football, and in terms of both women's participation, but generally, you know, things like the MCC refusing to accept women members and continue voting against that. The media very much represent that as a kind of colonial leftover, and as, you know, the MCC being very stuffy, and that basically if English cricket doesn't accept kind of modernity and you know, movements towards more kind of accepting more progressive kind of elements in society, then cricket will just die. And so yeah, and I think that is probably in some ways a kind of accurate representation, but that is why that moment in 2014 is so interesting, because it is very much the ECB doing something revolutionary that isn't happening anywhere else in the world at that moment in time. And actually the BCCI is very much, I think, in terms of the top 8 or 10 women's cricket nations, India were actually the last to introduce professional contracts for the national team. So yeah, the ECB are sort of leading the way there. I don't know if that really answers your question.
I think it does, and it sort of segues into the next question for Sharda. Sharda, you know, the big shifts in women's sport, you can actually track them to pretty significant geopolitical movements as well. American women's sport around the Cold War to try and show that the US is much more progressive, much more sort of advanced than Russia in some sense. Then you see China and the sort of the Olympic Games in China, and to prove a point. So bigger geopolitical movements. Now we are trying to bring reform from within, right? Structures, people, processes. do we need to, in some sense, move away from rights-based frameworks and earning and desert to ride on some bigger movement and bigger alignment? And if so, are there ready alignments that women's cricket as a whole can sort of, I wouldn't want to use the word ride on the coattails of, but align and grow and get what you want?
You would think that that big movement for Indian cricket was, those not a geopolitical event, but a fundamental sporting event that happened. One day you switched on the TV and Indian women's team was in the quarterfinal or the semi-final of the 2017 World Cup. And so that would be like, because of the fact that everything in India is too extreme, a lot or very little. So right there at the door of the women's game, you had a lot, it's suddenly turned up. And it's interesting, again, what you're saying about geopolitical movements is if you're trying to track how India has done sports-wise, not keep cricket to one side, across Olympic sport, post-liberalization and say the advent of about, say, the start of the 21st century is when you see the growth of non-profits. You see our athletes traveling out and being professionals everywhere else in the world, playing professionally golf, polo, squash, whatever it is. So that is the big event that has taken place that pushed our sports that way. Cricket was running on its own engine of broadcast rights and revenue and popularity that spun off and then spun again in 2007 with the World Cup. So I think that there were 2 points, like how, for example, I'm wondering whether you can connect. I don't think cricket you can connect to a larger geopolitical event in that sense as much as you can all other sports with reference to the Commonwealth Games in 2010. As to what happened with that, whether you saw with, because you had to produce these athletes, you had to get to those medals, so you had wrestlers and gymnasts and so on. In cricket, you had these 2 tipping points that came out by pure accident because cricket was functioned in a bubble of its own. One was the 2007 World Cup and one was the Indian women's performances over the last 2 years that you had. The 2007 World Cup sort of fitted in beautifully with the other substructure that existed in Indian cricket. That was there, that kept growing. The women's performance, because there was not that substructure didn't exist. So it's like just up floating about in the air. So I don't think the women's game could be made to ride on the coattails. I think it will have to be rights-based because you're getting nothing. There's no players' association. The only sport in India that has a players' association of any merit is football. There is no players' association, I think, of any, perhaps golf, which I don't know about. In cricket, there is none. The players' association that is there is paid for by the BCCI, looked after by the BCCI, kept silent by the BCCI. So there are all these other sort of factors that are there, and you would want the market to also play its own part, because the political entanglements in cricket and in sport are in cricket particularly are so complex, and you don't know which way it's going to go. And old-fashioned response to women's sport can very easily be lapsed into. For the sake of, like you from the sports side and not from Playfield magazine, that not so embarrassing that you wouldn't want to say it, but too embarrassing to put your name on it, kind of. So you can very easily lapse into that kind of almost regressive mindset. And another point is that unlike English cricket, for example, traditional English cricket, Indian cricket had redefined itself by being a sport of the street. It came from the street, it was lived on the street, it belonged to the street. But then when you, as you grew, you have to fall into this little, its own empire, its separate empire, its own hierarchies. That's what you sort of automatically fitted into, and which is where the women are sort of left out of that space. I don't know whether I'm saying anything that sort of fits in with what you're looking in terms of that geopolitical argument in that sense.
Yeah, I guess I was talking about there's also a Beti Padhao movement. It's about giving sort of young girls their space. Can
the other one, yeah,
used in some sense for India's awakening and India making a point on the world stage, and not just our Olympic athletes, but also women cricketers?
Okay. Going from what I remember, the discussion that was there yesterday in this first session that we had, they talked about pushing cricket in schools. Now, when you how do you push cricket in school? There is this thing called the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which all through, when I was doing stories about football in the Northeast, that's what you heard about all the time. saying that the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan said you have to have so much time set for play, you have to have this, and it will spread everywhere. So you can try this Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, but how many players are you going to coach and train and keep ready if you are not going to give them games to play? So you have to have a widespread, like for example, with Olympic sports, you've got Asian Games, Commonwealth Games, you've got target things that you have to match. In cricket, you can sit without doing anything. If you're really not interested in pushing or embracing your women's cricket across the country, not just in these little pockets, because your numbers will be decent, you'll manage. So you can put a plan in place, but without the BCCI driving it and without being driven from the top saying this has to be done. We have to have this many people that are there. There are 38 associations, and yesterday the count was about 7 or 8 are genuinely interested and genuinely involved in doing things for women's cricket. There's another, Raf, you would be absolutely fascinated to hear this, that there is almost like a shadow Women's Cricket Association of India tournaments, and during COVID, they were trying to run these little programs, just to make sure that the women's cricketers had something to do, to play, to train, whatever. I found it fascinating. I don't know all the details about it, but for it to be widespread, like the game itself is widespread, is you will need to have direction come from the fact, because the BCCI functions by itself independently of say the government order or stricture, even though it is now pretty much the government itself. But you do have that. It has to come with because the institution is not very strong. Individuals that are there have to push much more than they do at this point.
And to take that forward, Sharda, to stay with you, sort of the Supreme Court looked at this and very clearly classified the BCCI as having a public function. Now, it doesn't mean that you can sit and do nothing. What do you think the public function of the BCCI is beyond running the Indian men's cricket team? And can the notion of a public function mean that there's actually active responsibility and a duty of care? And is that a line of legal logic that needs to be taken forward for this movement to gain its feet?
I think it's a very sound and a reasonable thing that you're saying, that the primary function of the BCCI is not to make money from cricket. It is to use the money that they make in cricket for cricket. And we are finding that it's the reverse that is happening there. So the whole sense of public function doesn't exist. You're hearing definitions about people talking about, oh, you are working in a company, you have to be able to produce some product or whatever nonsense that quote was. So the fact that you are there in service of the sport is not present. I don't think it's present in any sports organization beyond, say, a few people and so on. The Supreme Court recommendations that had one state, one team kind of a thing, it was met with such a backlash that, oh, we have to play cricket in Nagaland. Oh, we have to play cricket in Mizoram. It's your sport. If you're not going to make it bigger, who is? There has to be a response. And now, for example, in women's cricket, it's like you're starting on a clean slate. So you've got a chance to do more. And like Raf was saying, that you're trying to get the best athletes from your country to play your sport. You don't know in cricket if you're going to get the best athletes from the country, because it's easier for women athletes that are there, girls who want to play sport, to go into so many other things, not team sports, because team sports are seen as messy. So you become runners, you become badminton players, you become whatever else, whatever the other complications that they may be. And so we don't even know, because there is no auditing that's done even of male sport and male cricket, never mind female cricket, of how many girls have dropped out of cricket because of COVID. You don't even know that number. And so, I mean, we could go on about the importance of there having to be a public function in it, but it's almost like it will only be driven not by self-motivation, but by some case being put or something happening or something pushing it. That it will come from that kind of thing. And we've seen what happens post the Lodha recommendations is blocked. They've said you have to have a woman in the panel, so you'll put some token woman on it. That kind of response, it's a very medieval, and it's quite frightening if you're looking at how restrictive almost the desire is to hold on to this big pot of gold on which they're sitting and not use it, not use it for anything constructive. In a post-COVID world, let's say.
Rafaelle, what is your experience with legally mandated change? You look at the sort of anti-discrimination statutes, equal pay statutes. You have the Title IX in the US, which talks about use of federal funds without discrimination. What is the experience of sports governors in response to forced change? Are they sort of more open, and is that the only thing that's going to get them? Or does it have to come from within in some sense?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So in the UK, about 5 years ago, UK Sport and Sport England introduced something called the Code for Sports Governance, which essentially, because sports most of the main sports are in receipt of money from the government, and the idea was to provide accountability about that. So there were quotas introduced, for example, and one of them was that each of these boards had to have 30% gender diversity. So for cricket, for example, the ECB have had to introduce more women on their board to get up to having at least 30% women on the board. And there are various other targets like that that they've had to work to, and kind of principles of accountable governance, so about kind of publishing how much various people in your organization earn and things like that. And that has been enforced, although there were kind of questions initially about the extent to which penalties were being imposed on organisations, because the governance code was, there was a little bit of nervousness about actually forcing it versus working with organisations. But it has generally been pretty effective, and what we're now seeing is that many more sporting organisations do have more like 40% of women on their boards now, which obviously isn't perfect, because ideally you want 50%, but things are moving in the right direction. But what I would say is that I think that we are now at a point where actually you have to move beyond that and do the next step, which is much harder, because as Sharda kind of says, introducing token women on the board doesn't necessarily do anything to change the kind of culture of your organization. And legal change can only really go so far. You have to have cultural change to match it, and it's quite difficult to do a cultural audit of an organization. And so I think that you know, we're on the verge of introducing a new code of sports governance. It's going to be very interesting to see whether there's any attempt to try and measure the kind of culture of organizations. But yeah, so in answer to your question, I think that these kind of legal aspects of change being imposed from above are very important, but if they're not matched by kind of a genuine commitment to equality within those working in the organisation, then that's quite difficult. And really, that's what takes me to my conclusion about devolution, is that actually what we previously had within women's cricket was it was being run by people who played the sport, who'd grown up in the sport, who understood the differences between women's and men's cricket, because they're not the same, they haven't developed in the same way, and who kind of certainly within the English context really cared about the welfare of the players, and cared about growing the game, and that was their priority, to a kind of situation where now you know, the men's game has a kind of normative priority, and even if you introduce women on the board, if they don't have a background in women's cricket, then there's a kind of problematic aspect with that. So actually, wouldn't it be great if we could revert to a situation where women's cricket was being run by the people who had its best interests at heart, rather than having to juggle it with an already full agenda that's kind of led by men's cricket, really. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from with that vision, I suppose.
Yeah, I'd like Sharda to comment on that, but also another sort of related aspect. So one is devolution. Can this work in an Indian context? But the second is competition. Are we better off in sort of US mode? Let the private sector in, let the private sector lead, bring in leagues, and just sort of stand back and allow that product to be developed. Because your problem is that there isn't a finished product. You're not willing to invest in product development. So should we, in some sense, like I think we had a cricketer yesterday talk about people like other people's bats more than their own bats, just like they like, I think, their neighbors' wives better for some reason. Should we let this become someone else's bat for it to be coveted in the places where change can also occur, is there a notion of competition? So two bits, your comments on devolution, your comments on a parallel system, building this product to a point where the BCCI or any other body is happy enough with that finished product that it's ready to take it out to the world.
The idea of devolution is a great one, for the simple reason that there is goodwill and there is sort of an interest that is there amongst women that play cricket, that are part of cricket, to sort of see the sport flourish. I think in an Indian context, there is no way BCCI would part with even 1 rupee if they had no control over it, 50 paisa. So, but it's a great idea. Even the point of what you hear in conversations about women cricket, oh, they fight with each other, they hate each other. It's all this old sort of stuff that you heard about women, about everything, all the way in true history, basically. So you'll hear it's not as if there is no fighting or hating each other in male organizations. Also, the big gap, I think that the gap in the BCCI's role towards women's cricket is because they have taken away decision making and from a professional bunch of people that are paid salaries to do a job. So there are not, those people don't, they've taken away the power of decision making. They have reduced the power, or they've diluted the power of their professional office, the CEO, the CFO, the manager, all the other sort of little structures that are there. It had just begun fledgling, and then they sort of they've taken it down. So that is also a factor. Your idea about handing it over to the competition is a great one, because everybody knows that the IPL franchises are itching to be able to do something with women's cricket. They want to have a women's team, and they would run it much better than the BC. Even if it's just for a restricted 2 months of a year, or you can have 3 months of a year of their league competition. They'll be able to do a much better job because they actually have skin in the game in a genuine way. But again, they would not be allowed to do it, because it is again a question of territorial ownership of this thing, and they would want the BCCI would want control over it. They would want a profitability margin from it. So it's an absolutely great idea that, okay, let the private enterprises come and handle this. Start with the 8 franchises that you have, and then let's go to the others. People say that 2 more want to turn up, and we don't know where it can go. In cricket, for particular, I mean, the franchise example has worked best for cricket when compared to any other sport in the country. It has revolutionized the entire game across the world. It may still do so if you get women involved in it. So it's a radical idea. It's a great idea. Then you say, okay, what happens to the 50-over version and what happens to the longer version? But maybe those are issues that you can deal with at another stage, the stage after this perhaps.
Raf, your comments. Does women's cricket need its Packer moment or its ICL moment, Indian Cricket League?
Well, they tried a few years ago. There was a proposal that Lisa Sthalekar was involved in for a women's independent cricket league, but the ICC stomped on the idea pretty quickly. And then Cricket Australia decided to organise the Women's Big Bash League, which was basically a response to this idea of a breakaway women's cricket league. So I think Sharda's right. It's all about power and control, isn't it? And it's quite interesting what we see in England, which is that it's the ECB that is still, despite the fact that I suppose you could argue that to some extent, the 8 new regions that we've got here, which the domestic professional contracts are attached to, are kind of independent organisations, but they are very much being funded centrally by the ECB. And yes, they have their own budgets and they have staff, but the ECB is kind of still retaining overall control. So it's a very different model to the one that is obviously operating in India, whereby the IPL franchises are totally separate commercial organisations. And there are some interesting power dynamics at play there in terms of, what we saw in the Kia Super League was there was a tension between the teams wanting to win the competition and the England coach saying, well, hang on a minute, I want my players to, why are you opening with Susie Bates when you could be opening with, Danny Wyatt or whoever, who's actually going to be opening for England. And that's what the competition's all about. It should be, from the England coach's perspective, it's about developing the England team and future England players, whereas from the region's perspective, it's about kind of they want to win the competition. So there is definitely a tension there, and I think we're going to see that playing out over the next few years as these regions embed. I think that, as I say, I think Sharda's right that it comes down to who kind of has the power and the control. And in England, the ECB have been quite reluctant to cede any of that, I think.
Yeah, and I think that alignment, Sharda, what do you think about the women, our marquee women players being given the NOCs to play in the 100 and the Women's Big Bash League, while the men are, any current player is actually barred from playing any of the other leagues? What is that a sign of with respect to Indian sort of administration's future outlook for women cricketers? Is it a sort of a release valve, go and play, you can make your money elsewhere and no responsibility on us to build this? Or is it some sort of a broader thing that we need to read into in terms of, is this a first step towards building something here? We want more cricketers before we start private leagues.
It's quite interesting that this has happened. It's almost like a way of go out of our, step away from us, go and do what you want to do. It's fine. The way I'm looking at this is that they're saying that the women players, why are the men players not allowed to go and play in all these other countries? I mean, we have example of 7, if now must be more, maybe 17, who knows, are not getting NOCs to play elsewhere. People are retiring quicker because they see them as valuable commodities that they don't want to share with other leagues. They don't want to share that valuable commodities with other leagues. They want to keep the value of the Indian Premier League at its absolute peak, to say our best players are going to play here, and and the value of the women's game is then seen as, it's fine, you can go and play elsewhere. So it's that ghar ki mooli dal barabar kind of a thing to say for the women. It's like it's fine, it's no big deal, go play. How it will change within the women players themselves, you don't know how it will work. The way I see it, the moment they start to gain separate identities as freelance players is when they will be trying to be reeled back in. Because again, it's not that they want sort of women wandering off in this rogue manner, being successful and becoming stars in other parts of the world and not adding to their, being of financial benefit or profit or value to them. That's the way that I see it. I mean, I think women would love to play in a women's IPL, and I think they still could. This thing of saying that we don't know if they are players, but you're not having enough tournaments, or you're not having camps, or you're not having outreach programs to see that where the women's players are. So that's the way I look at it. I don't think it's an experiment. I think it's just taking the women a little too lightly and saying that it's fine, you can go and play. If it was a chance to want to sort of show generosity and general benevolence, you would let the men go as well.
Raf, you were nodding there. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In terms of as a female cricketer, can you kind of go off and be freelance? Because obviously one of the things that holds people like Harmanpreet Kaur back from saying what she really feels about what's going on with Indian women's cricket and what she really feels about the role of the BCCI is the fact that that they're her employer. So actually the power dynamics would massively change were she to actually detach herself from the BCCI and say, no, I'm just going to go off and I'm going to play in the Women's Big Bash League, I'm going to play in the 100, I'm just going to do these various different things independently. Whether that's economically feasible, I think that the women who have tried it, so for example, Rachel Priest from New Zealand actually found that quite a difficult lifestyle to maintain financially, but it's possible that in the next few years that could actually become a more realistic prospect. And then I think that the power dynamic does change. And to us in the UK, it really does feel that players like Harmanpreet are big superstars in their own right, in a way that our England women cricketers just aren't, because there isn't the same level of interest in cricket in England as there is in India. So to me, it feels quite interesting to hear Sharda say that she doesn't think that any of the players are, or that the BCCI doesn't perceive any of the players as big enough stars yet. I think that's quite interesting, because from our perspective, they do feel like they are big stars already.
Yeah, and I think we have just a few minutes left. Just in closing comments to each of you, what does an equal hue mean to each of you? And what are 3 or 4 things that the sort of the Indian environment, the broader ecosystem can start doing to move towards that equal hue? Maybe first, Sharda, what is an equal hue to you and how do we get there?
I think everything in our sport is short and inadequate, and this is across all sport, about opportunity, about access and opportunity. Is just to a degree that's a scale. So an equal hue is starts at the very basic principle of access to sport and opportunity to be able at the highest level. Have I frozen, Nandan, by any chance?
Just a little bit, but I think we got your audio. You can repeat that.
Yeah, I said, so an equal hue is just an equal chance at the starting point of your game. That is access, the freedom to play what you want, the freedom to access the sport you want, and for women particularly, and the freedom to have opportunities to get better at it, or even just treat it like a game of leisure, which is available in various degrees to the men. Across and the other question was about how can you do this?
Yeah, just 3 or 4 things that any of us, not just the people in administration, what can we start doing to work towards that idea?
I think listening to what is being said by female athletes about cricketers, particularly about what they need from their sport, or just being able to broaden our minds with reference to what you can offer as sporting careers and alternatives for young girls coming into which you would in the UK, for example. I think it's much more freely available. It's not seen as an odd thing to want to do. And moving away from the metros, I think, is also a very important part of sort of increasing the numbers that are there. That's one. And for all sport is just having enough playing time at whatever level that you can. You don't have to be multi-billionaire sport in every way. You can be a small sport or a small organization in a small neighborhood, but just being able to give girls a chance to play pretty much the year round if they can. I mean, that's exactly. I mean, you start there, and everything else will, I think, get healthier as you go along.
Right.
Yeah, I'd echo what Sharda says. I think for me, the thing about unequal hue and equality is it's not going to be achieved quickly, and it's not going to be something that we can do overnight. It's a gradual process. So it's partly about the goals that you set yourself. And, so for example, you could suggest, well, women cricketers should be paid the same as men. You might say, well, we're not going to achieve that tomorrow, but if that's your goal that you've got in mind and everything that you do is working towards that, then that's, I think that's good enough. So yeah, for me, kind of an equal hue is about goals. In terms of how we get there, well, obviously my big point is about devolution, but I think that the broader kind of philosophical principle underlying that is about treating the women's game as not the same as the men's game, and understanding that it needs to be handled almost kind of independently, or at least differently, and understanding what the different challenges are. In terms of what people can do to kind of help achieve that, I think partly it's about educating yourself. So by attending events like this, if you haven't, then obviously do read the Equal Hue report, because it's such an excellent document and it really does lay out the challenges and the opportunities very clearly. I think it was great to see during the recent Bristol test that there was so much engagement of Indian cricket fans with the cricket. It really felt like that was a bit of a breakthrough moment, actually. So if anyone can do that. Anyone can be using hashtags and be going on social media and having these conversations during women's matches. And I think that shows organisations like the BCCI that fans care. and that will speak to them in a way that perhaps other things won't, because they will understand that that's what that ultimately there's a commercial element to that, isn't there? If people care about the women's game, then hopefully that will convince the BCCI to continue investing in it and to grow their investment. And I think that volunteers are really crucial in sport, certainly in England. A lot of the grassroots stuff that we see, grassroots women's and girls club cricket that leads to kind of more women accessing the game is very much about people just on their own, or a group of people starting a club or starting a girl section at a club and working with that and giving up a few hours a week to do that. So if you are in a position to be able to do that and to be able to kind of help women and girls kind of starting on their cricketing journey, then I think that that's something that most people can kind of get involved in on a day-to-day basis as well.
Fantastic. And just last comment, let's say we had the same chat 10 years from now. What we will all have something to complain about or something to say, sort of point fingers at. What would show that we have moved to a better place? What are the sorts of things we should be complaining about 10 years from now?
I mean, something we've not talked about a lot is kind of media coverage, I suppose. I think that really there's, if in 10 years' time we're not in a situation where, all women's international and domestic matches are being televised, are accessible for people to watch, then that would be something very much to complain about. And if we're not in a situation where I guess that the women's game is attracting kind of similar column inches to the men's game, that would be something I would very much question. Obviously, I've got a little bit of a personal interest in that because I'm hoping that I can kind of keep making a little bit of money and maybe that women's cricket will increasingly be seen as something that newspaper editors want to invest more money in. But I think that that's so important in terms of visibility. So if we don't have that in 10 years, you're welcome to get me back, and I'll happily complain about it.
Fantastic. Sharda?
Mine is. I hope in 10 years we are complaining about the fact that the difference between the men's and the women's earnings is something like 15%, and we're getting really annoyed about it. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you both. That was a really wonderful conversation. I learned a lot from it. Back to Yogita.
Thanks, Nandan. Thank you, Sharda. Thank you, Rafaelle. Thank you, Nandan, for sharing your thoughts and insights. The session's indeed been very informative. Thank you to the Bangalore International Centre as well for hosting this in collaboration with the symposium. Thank you so much.